Good morning and welcome to the SolarWinds MSP Risk Intelligence product overview. My name is Scott Parker and with me today is Billy Austin, VP of Security. Good morning, Billy.
Good morning, Scott. Thanks for having me here today.
So, Billy, today we have a lot of folks on the line. They're excited to hear about the new product that we're bringing into the Enable portfolio, Risk Intelligence. Billy, let's launch right into it then. What is the Risk Intelligence product? Well, this is a fantastic new software that I think our partners are really going to get a lot of mileage out of. This is the kind of thing that back in the day when I was working for an MSP, I was looking for all the time. And I think this is a really great opportunity to get in and prove some new types of value to our end partners and for them to prove to their customers and to really succeed and grow companies with it. And it's another great stream of revenue. What it does is it's a tool that's going to expose critical data vulnerability on your devices. And it's going to answer some pretty important questions for our end users. Questions such as, what data on your network is at risk? And Billy, tell us a little bit about that question and why that's important.
Well, good question, Scott. I think when you look at the headlines that are highlighting a lot of the data breaches out there, first and foremost, one of the things that come to mind is credit cards. And while many small business, medium business are accepting credit cards, what I'd like to highlight is it's a lot more at risk than just traditional credit card data. You've probably been seeing things like healthcare, universities, and many other industries that are storing other types of data. Everybody's trying to safeguard it and trying to avoid falling or becoming prey to the next victim. So you have other types of data like driver's license, social security, in addition to things like trade secrets and intellectual property.
For sure. Okay, and the second question, I think, in this list, who has access to it? And I know that was something we always struggled with, and I know a lot of our partners struggle with. The Active Directory becomes a convoluted mess in many ways because of an influx of contractors and that sort of thing. Knowing who has access to that critical data for our partners is a really important question. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so historically when we've been doing these assessments and working with partners that are leveraging the technology to go out and do these assessments, is you will commonly discover the data inside of a file that might be sitting on file share servers, for an example. And one of the next questions that we want to ask from a business perspective is, now that we've identified what data is important to us and we know what's putting our business at risk, is we want to understand what individuals, what groups, or perhaps even ex-employees or third-party business contractors have access to that data. And the reason is there could be what we call excessive access, and then sometimes, given the today's connectivity of on and off the network type remote employees, is they're more prone to bringing in the nasty into our corporate environment, where if they have excessive access, they could be used as a pivot point to start proliferating and sharing all of those ransomwares and malware and viruses and so on and so forth. So it's important to be able to reduce the excessive access, if you will.
Of course. And now this third question, how can attackers gain access to the data? And, I think as MSPs, we feel we do, a good job of bringing things like AV and patch into the environments to make sure that access to data is contained, or rather, from a hacker point of view. But there's always things at the back of our mind that we worry, did we do enough? Are we protecting everything that needs to be protected? Tell me a little bit about this question.
And so when you look at how the bad guys are predominantly gaining access into these systems, exfiltrating the data, the majority of these are through traditional operating system and third-party application vulnerabilities. And vulnerabilities can simply be defined as a software flaw that is simply providing a backdoor enabling the data thieves entry into that system, and then they're running their toolkits and scripts to be able to exfiltrate that data that's residing on that same system that's vulnerable.
That kind of leads into our fourth question, and I think, honestly, this fourth question to me is the most interesting, and I think would be the most interesting to both our partners and their customers. And I've never really seen it put this way before in a software tool, which is why I'm so excited about Risk Intelligence. How much will a data breach cost when it occurs? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so if you look at the first three questions, they've traditionally been very hard to answer. We've had to go out and buy 3 different types of technologies, predominantly data discovery, file permission auditing tools, vulnerability tools, and really when you think about it, we're bringing all that together. And when you look at data breaches as a whole, we wanted to be able to respond and provide answers in one simple scan, one simple report. And what we felt is we wanted to step the communication and the transformation of risk up to business owners, also into the C-suite and executives, where they could be able to comprehend and digest all of these details. So what we decided to do was to create an algorithm and a process and methodology that quantifies all of those technical results and communicates it in a universal language we all speak, and that's dollars and cents. Now, if you really think about the power that that's going to enable the managed service provider to have a meaningful conversation with the business owner to be able to illustrate their risk in dollars and cents, if you will.
Yeah, and that's, I think that's a language that everyone is going to be able to understand, from, your CIO and all the way on down, which is a really valuable conversation to be able to have, and one I know many of our partners really struggle with having. It's hard to prove the value of that security, and with the Risk Intelligence product, as you'll see as we go through here, it makes that job so much easier to do. So we're going to be able to communicate that vulnerability and that security risk with several things. One, that dollar cost value, which is fantastic. You're going to be able to trend vulnerability over time, so you're going to be able to provide an assessment to your customer of the improvements you're doing over time, which I think is really valuable. We're going to be able to provide several reports and some really excellent dashboards that are really easy to understand but extremely powerful in terms of the information they deliver. We're also going to be able to provide things like compliancy reporting for things like PCI and HIPAA, which we know many of our partners are running into today as well. So, there's a lot of really great functionality in a very small, compact package. That brings us to, why will your customers love it? So why will our MSP's customers love it? We're going to be able to build a strong case for security investment through audits. So as Billy has mentioned, it's always hard to have that conversation. People don't always see the value of improving security, deepening security. But with things like ransomware and that sort of thing around, this is a conversation that has to happen with every client. But how do you have that conversation? Having a tool like this is really going to boost your credibility and the ability to go in and point to data rather than just simply, what's going on in the news. It's going to allow you to locate all your sensitive data and minimize your customer's exposure, which is obviously extremely valuable to your end user. It'll help you estimate and control your data insurance requirements. Larger companies today are turning to things like data insurance. In the event that they lose data, they're hacked, things are exposed. If they end up in a situation where they're getting into trouble for it, how do you know how much insurance you need? And do you start with 500 million? Do you start with 5 million? With a product like this, you're going to be able to attach a good dollar figure to it, and instead of, tackling the $300 million worth of risk you might see today, let's lessen that risk down to a manageable amount and move forward with that amount. So this tool will help with that as well. Understand the dollar cost of a potential security breach, and that I think is one of the primary uses of this and really helps you communicate the value of that security. And then, of course, using all this data that you're going to retrieve, you're going to be able to proactively protect your customers' data. What do security breaches have in common? Do you want to take us a little bit through this, Billy, and tell us, what do we see in most breaches today?
When you look at what we call the attack surface, that nomenclature is used throughout security and data breach industry, if you will. And what we try to do is we analyze all of these data breaches that are taking place, and if you break that attack surface up into what we call small little vectors, there's literally thousands and thousands of different potential possibilities on how the bad guys are getting in. So in order to find a starting point, we can't really tackle all those thousands of vectors. So my recommendation is, how do we get a baseball bat and mitigate the greatest percentage of risk with the tools, the resources, and the budget that we have readily available? So in short conclusion, after doing some research on some of the latest incidents, is you're going to find three commonalities that exist across each and every one of these breaches. And if you think about it, you can't really have a data breach if there was no data that was unprotected, presenting the business at risk. And as I mentioned earlier, it's much more than credit card data. You have personal identifiable information. That acronym usually is referred to as PI. You also have protected health information, which is PHI. And then we have things like trade secrets that might be the drawings of a blueprint drawing of the next F-44 fighter jet. So at the end of the day, we all have something that we're trying to safeguard. So you have unprotected data, and as I mentioned earlier, we also have what's called unauthorized access. And sometimes this could just be due to prying eyes for an employee that might be exiting. It could also be inadvertent access if the system was already compromised and the bad guy perhaps is using that machine to pivot and gain access to proliferate throughout the network with an ultimate goal of gaining access to the crown jewels. And third is, we've been battling this 20-year-old problem of identifying operating system and third-party application vulnerabilities. And while most of the remedies can be solved by patching, there's also other things like disabling, enabling a service, perhaps modifying a browser configuration, in addition to another remedy that's commonly overlooked, which is simply modifying a registry key value. And I think when you look at our entire portfolio within Central, combined with the risk intelligence, it complements each other very well.
All right, so Billy, I would like you to take us through this slide and just reiterate some of the key points we've covered so far before we get a look at that risk intelligence tool and how it addresses these.
Yeah, so this is great to have. Many of us throughout our presentations, we tend to develop a 5 or 10 slide PowerPoint presentation. And when I'm talking to my colleagues or customers throughout the service provider, this is probably one slide that you can present and be able to talk to that basically tells an entire storyboard. And if you think about the powerful questions that you can now sit down with the business owner and perhaps start it off with how important. So if you take a look at that, how important is it for you to identify what data is at risk? And to do it before the inevitable occurs. And what I mean by that is to identify it before a potential data breach happens. And so if you can be able to identify that, that actually prompts us to create action to either A, start encrypting, or B, securely delete that data that's not warranted. So to move forward with the storyboard is we want to understand what's putting our business at risk. In this case, it happens to be credit card, social, and drivers. Secondly is we want to reduce the people in groups that have access to that data that was discovered. And then 3 is, now that we understand what's at risk, we also want to start reducing the scope by eliminating the potential back doors into the computer or into the servers or potential network where those bad guys could start prying around and start looking around for that data that we know that's unprotected. And we stopped right there and we said, all right, all the technical guys totally get it. They love the single report. However, they were missing something. We needed to communicate that risk to C-suites, the executives, because sometimes they just don't understand all of these technical details like red, yellow, green, vulnerable severities, if you will. So when we look at that quantification, the way to interpretate this is, if this specific machine gets compromised, based on industry averages and the factual evidence of that machine, that's going to be quantified in a total risk, or what we call the potential liability exposure, of $722,000 in this specific instance. So the first question that you probably are going to get is, how do you come up with that number? There is a popular data breach research analyst out there that spend countless hours identifying what we call the cost of a data breach record. And what we do is we take the means of those popular reports, things like Verizon Data Breach, Ernst & Young, Ponemon, so we can also reference and leverage those brand names that are going to resonate and be very well adopted throughout the industry. And if you take the means of those three reports, for an example, they're going to produce a calculated data breach record cost, and we're using that. So where you see the letter V, that stands for variable. And we're going to take that variable and multiply that times R, which is simply the volume of unprotected records. Now, by default, that record is going to be a credit card, a social security, a driver's license, and a date of birth. However, you do have the customization capability to modify that. And each and every customer is a little bit different. But when you first get started, that is a simple data set that's almost applicable to every business throughout the globe. So what that's going to produce is what we call a subtotal. And in order to provide, to increase the merit and the validity of that quantification, what we decided to do is also take that subtotal and multiply it by W, which we refer to as weighting. And that's simply weighting based on unauthorized access. And here shortly I'll show you a couple of live reports. But one thing that's very common if you're assessing things like regional banks and credit unions, it's all too common to be assessing a specific server and seeing all of these files with all of the customer bank account numbers, loan applications, and you'll see a group called the Everyone group that simply has access to everything in the company, or at least on that specific file, if you will. So you want to be able to weight that so it provides a higher prioritization when it comes to remediation time. So that'll move on to the next subtotal, and what you would do is you would take that and multiply that times what we call the red, or the critical high severity vulnerabilities. And the reason you want to do that is typically when you see those red vulnerabilities, that construes where exploit shellcode is already readily available and could simply be launched in order to compromise that system. Or it also means that if the attack code is not available, it means that that vulnerability is capable of eventually having some type of attack code readily available in the future. So when you take that information and summarize it, that includes what we refer to as the financial impact. I hear probably 50% of our customers also use the verbiage liability exposure. So and simply the best way to interpret that is, if something happens to that data, we can leverage all of that research and simply quantify it that says, if something happens, this is based on industry averages and our factual data at risk. This is what the estimated cost is going to be. How do we do the data acquisition? And when you look at the data acquisition, we lift the hood up. One thing that we're really big on is detecting, discovering, and being able to provide remediation based on the prioritization. When you show these reports, your audience is going to be able to digest it and comprehend it. So one of the first questions that are going to come to mind is, how do you go out and do this? We wanted to remove the barrier of shipping hardware, deploying complex software installations. So what we did is we leveraged our patented scanning technology, and we deliver it in the forms of what we call a command line executable. It is simply a downloadable binary, or it's also available in a curl or PowerShell script. And what that simply means is you can now open up your N-Central or any systems management tool and say, let's go run this script on all of our endpoints, and it leverages that local processor to be able to perform the assessment. And when it's done, all of that data goes back to your cloud console that's going to be able to empower you to start telling powerful storyboards, illustrating and demonstrating the risk for that given computer and that specific customer.
One of the questions I've seen go by already, and I think here's a good place to answer it, Billy, is, can I run this from N-Central? So I think the really great benefit, one of the great benefits of the way you've designed Risk Intelligence is we have that ability to take that script, put it into a scheduled task or an automation manager policy, and have it push out either for auditing purposes on a one-time basis. And it runs, it downloads the binary, the executable, it does its thing, it uploads that data back to the cloud. So super easy to deal with. It also puts that information into your job, your scripting job status directly in N-Central, so you can retrieve it there. So it's really convenient as far as running it directly on your devices without having to run around to each device and set it up, or with a scheduled task, creating a recurring event if this is an ongoing, a service function that you're performing for your customer. So either way, you can run it directly through N-Central and get your results. You mentioned there, Billy, that there's multiple kinds of data to take away from here. I've got a list here just for our partners to understand kind of how much you're getting in one small package. The data breach risk report is kind of the primary report. It's the one that pulls together all that information in the most effective way, I feel, and I think presents things really well. But why don't you tell us just briefly a little bit about each of these quick reports, if you could?
Yeah, absolutely. So the things that we're going to demonstrate today are definitely going to be on the data breach risk, and I would say that well over 95% of our assessments taking place, or that's the most popular assessment. However, we've also given our backgrounds on developing scan technology and giving your requirements with delivering services to the customer. We decided to also include other scan types. So for an example, if you just want to do vulnerability and patch scanning, we do have those types of scan templates available. The unique thing is, if you're only interested in vulnerability and patch, you have the capability to go out and run that, and it's very lightning fast. 0 false positives on the vulnerability and patch, and it provides some very powerful analytics. Secondly, as you move to the HIPAA data discovery, it's simply just focused on discovering and identifying data that's related to HIPAA and the HITECH Act. You can also modify based on the state. For an example, you might want to add license plates and so on and so forth. Payment data at risk is still very, very popular. So if your goal or objective is to only identify credit cards, you have that capability to only discover credit card, and I'll show you a sample report of that just because it's very powerful. And then we have these governing bodies like HIPAA, PCI, FSMA, so on and so forth. So what we've done with the PCI is it actually combines the vulnerability with the payment data at risk, and it also includes what we call testing procedures. Now, this is a required internal quarterly scan that can be performed by any service provider. Now, note the word internal. So we're not focused on the external public-facing IPs. We're focused on the internal ones that you can deliver without becoming a required certified PCI vendor. And then the last two that we have, an inventory scan. It simply is very lightning fast that you can assess, all the installed apps, get the third-party dates, you can get file shares. And we'll provide sample links of all these reports, at the end of this webinar. File Finder is very powerful, and there's a lot of people very excited. And the best way has numerous use cases. One is, have you ever wanted to find a file, perhaps an AutoCAD drawing, and of that F-44 fighter jet perhaps that we were talking earlier, And what it would do is go out and search the entire network, and it's going to tell you every location, every computer that it has installed on it. So that would be a good intention. We're also planning on expanding that, but let's say that, Code Purple or CryptoCrud.dll comes out tomorrow. That could be a nasty ransomware. We could actually take what we call the MD5 or SHA hash. If you're not familiar with hashes, think about it as a biometric fingerprint that identifies that really is a bad thing. And now we can go search all of our customers really quick that says, show me who has artifacts of all of that nasty stuff. And that way we can be able to start prioritizing corrective action to start reducing proliferation of those nasty things.
It kind of ties in with something we've been talking a lot about, again, that ransomware stuff. Once you know that your network has been infected, you're probably going to know what you got infected by, and you do know what that file looks like when it got first downloaded. The power of that file finder is amazing because you can simply look for that tag across every device, and it might be sitting at rest in a temporary download folder or what have you that no one is paying any attention to right now and might be overlooked by AV, but here we can find every instance of that across the network, which is really cool. And tell me a little bit about, I see a question here that I think has relevancy here. Things like Dropbox and that sort of thing. How does the Risk Intelligence product deal with those attached storage items?
Yeah, when you look at the adoption of mobility and cloud sharing, that simply just inherits, it presents additional areas of risk that historically has been invisible to us as IT auditors or information security and risk management teams. And when we get to the demonstration, I've got a visualization of some queries that we can run that are simply going to depict and start answering business questions like, how many people are storing critical data or perhaps classified documents in Dropbox. Just to provide a little bit more granularity, what I found is not many people are not aware of this, but when you deploy Google Drive, Dropbox, OneDrive, those types of things, what's happening is by the default configuration is it actually replicates and caches all of those files locally. So that'll give you some visibility to decode all of that technical information, so you have visibility on what's being stored in the cloud. Nevertheless, that's one manner that you can be able to discover and start providing answers, if you will.
Fantastic. And like you say, that's something we've always had trouble seeing into, and this, giving you that flashlight to look into those dark corners, I think is a really powerful asset and something that customers will see a lot of value to as well, because I know in the back of their minds when you speak to end users, they're always worried about that kind of stuff and whether or not anyone is really keeping an eye on it. So certainly very useful. So people have asked a question that I think we can answer with this slide is what license types are available with the Risk Intelligence product. So just before we dive into a demo and some of the really I think interesting quick wins you can get with customers, which Billy's going to explain to us, let me just tell you very briefly about the two license types you're going to see. Basically, you're going to have an assessment license and an as-a-service license. The assessment license, you're looking at a total of 4 scans a year, and so you're using this typically for like a quarterly audit, or as I've used this kind of tool in the past, although the tool has never been this good, Risk Intelligence is definitely a step above what I've had. This allows me to go in and perform an audit for a prospect. So if I'm trying to get my foot in the door, I want to prove to them that their current, provider or the way they're currently doing things may be somewhat ineffective. Running a tool like this is super low impact on the network and retrieves a ton of amazing data and really, I feel, influential data, which we've always had problems with before. The data, we've got back before from other tools like this is just, it's more than they're able to digest, and it doesn't resonate really well. Whereas with the Risk Intelligence product, that dollar figure cost and the really nice reporting really, I feel, resonates a lot better with end users, and they get it. They understand that, okay, we have a lot of risk and we're not addressing that, and this guy in front of me is able to articulate it in a way that we all around the table understand. So the assessment license, I think, will be very powerful for that. The other option is the as a service license, and that is an ongoing service offering. So if you are going to be running regular recurring scans for compliancy, or simply in an environment that just demands security and needs to know what's going on in the Dropbox world and everything else around it, as far as shared drives, etc., this is the license you're going to be looking at, and is just an ongoing scan. So those are the two things you can be looking at with this product: an assessment license or an as a service license. So if you're talking to your sales associate, make sure they explain both of them to you. Both have, I think, amazing benefits, and absolutely would be something that I wish I had a few years ago. So, Billy, let's take us through a live demo of Risk Intelligence. I'm going to throw it over to you and let people get a good look at it.
Yeah, so what I'm going to really focus on today is just step it up and focus on the high levels. We mentioned earlier, so we've highlighted a lot of benefits. When you open up your console, one of the first questions is, we're at a customer or we're remotely at a customer, how do we go out and start acquiring that data? So in this, what we would do is select on scan computers. We highlighted a lot of those different scan types that we spoke about on one of the slides. What would typically happen is, let's say you've loaded up 500 customers. You would come down and select what customer you want to actually perform an assessment on. In this case, we're going to go run the data breach risk assessment, and the default option is what we call that command line executable, and it's definitely the most popular for all of our customers. You'll notice that Windows, we've simply created what we call a PowerShell script. So if you actually want to test this out and you go out and sign up for a trial, which we'll provide information at the end of the webinar, simply just copy that PowerShell script, open up your command line window or a terminal prompt, and paste that in. Now, obviously, if you're on a Mac or a Linux machine like myself, you can scroll down and you'll see that we also have, instead of PowerShell, we use what we call curl scripts. Now, if you want to run those locally, just paste those in, hit enter, and it'll actually produce a report. And at the end, what you'll be able to do is go to View and Manage, click on your scan results, and you'll see a list of all of your scans. To save time on this webinar, I've actually loaded up 3 or 4 different reports. You'll also have some amazing and very powerful dashboard widgets. So in this case, if you're managing 50 different customers, you can look at all of them rolled up and see all the credit card data at risk, see all the PI, so on and so forth. But let's go transition that one. It was almost the first slide, I believe it was, Scott. We were talking about those business questions, and those are the business questions that I would really highly recommend that you comprehend and digest, incorporate into your sales and perhaps even what we call quarterly business meetings with your end user customer. And I'm going to take those 4 business questions and apply that to what we call a single data breach risk report looking at an individual host. So in this specific example, remember the question that we said, what data is at risk? Well, here you can see on Shakira's machine that we've actually identified all of these different pretty little icons that most should resonate with everyone. However, I did customize this scan, and I decided to look for an additional financial payment system, and that's looking at what we call ACH payments, as it's becoming widely popular through a lot of different industries. So most people should be able to digest that little chart. Secondly, as we talked about, if something bad happens, what would it cost that specific, what would it cost to that customer if only this machine were to be compromised? And you'll see we give that financial impact score here in dollars and cents. 2 is, now that we know what data is at risk, we want to understand how the bad guys could potentially gain access, and we've done that through discovering the third-party applications and the operating system vulnerabilities. Now, in order to elevate your game to a business conversation, we've decided to just give you a summary here, and the best way to interpret that is, if we were to actually remediate Adobe and Microsoft in this case, that would eliminate 91%, if you add these two together, of the potential backdoor vectors to the data thief. And then third is, now that we understand our vulnerable posture, what data is at risk, we also want to understand where you found this data, and you'll see that we're going to give you the file path here. And when you expand that, a lot of people don't see this, but if you click on this, it'll actually give you the file permissions. For those of you that are not familiar with all these little polka dots over here, these are simply the level of file permission. So RWS, those are read, write, and special types of permissions. So as you can see, the X with everyone, that would be execute, has the capability to execute that file. Now, a common question is, since we are a cloud-based solution, we are discovering this data, we don't want to be held liable as a company. So what we do is we mask and redact the data. So, and the same goes for you. You don't want to have full visibility to 100% of that data stream. So when we use the words masked or redacted, that simply illustrates all the X's that come back to us. And the reason you want to have a header or footer, or in some cases just a footer, is so you can be able to run queries and be able to get pinpoint that data with accuracy if in fact you start doing research. Secondly is, if you are looking for ACH payment, I want to show you something that's very powerful. The service providers I've spoke with that show this report and customize this scan, literally well over 90% closure rate. And the reason is, when you're speaking to a president of a regional bank and you can show that you've assessed their environment and you start showing all of their financial calculations, and everyone in the company has access, including third-party business contractors, that's a very bad thing. And most presidents, especially in the credit union, regional banking industry, these guys really get it, and they love this feature right here because they understand too many people have just way too much access. So at the end of the day, if you can leave this webinar, if you can master how to communicate and tell a story with this individual report, it's very powerful. Secondly is, after you've signed up for a trial, you run that local scan, this is kind of what to expect. Don't be shocked if you see larger numbers. We've seen them go all the way up to almost, I think it's $498 million on one server that was also sitting on the public internet with everybody applying for loans. And to be at the end of the day, this is how these breaches are taking place. And now you have visibility to inform the customer before something bad happens. So secondly is, what happens if you start assessing thousands of machines? So the report that you're looking at now is a roll-up of what we just looked at, and the default simply looks by host name. However, I've decided to change the grouping by organization. And simply what that means is, from a service provider view, I want to have visibility of each and every one of my customers and the actual liability by each customer. And that's going to help me focus on applying IT operations and remediation services so we can start reducing that scope. In addition, this will also help set up meetings, very meaningful meetings with the customer, to educate them on perhaps they need security awareness training, maybe technological solutions like encryption, and it's also going to help justify your remediation services for applying patches on a continuous basis. Speaking of continuous basis, I'm a big believer of doing more than a one-time project-based assessment. So that leads me into what we call trending. Some of you may use the word comparative analysis. So almost everything I do in life, I believe in measuring, and I want to make sure that I'm getting better. So let me take a stab at communicating. If I'm a security engineer and I work for you, this is the storyboard I want to be able to tell. Last month, we went and did that baseline data breach risk assessment, and we discovered $10 million of risk. After I've had time to do some remediation, which is simply, applying patches, reducing that excessive exposure, perhaps deleting or securing data, is I want to reduce that liability exposure down to what we call an acceptable threshold. It's important to note that you're never going to get to zero. We have the human element that continues storing data. They also receive it. They start deploying these cloud sharing technologies like Dropbox and those types of things, and the data just continuously gets there. So it's a constant battle right now. And you might be wondering why the significant spikes. There's lots of reasons. Perhaps we're now assessing new devices that were invisible to us before. Given today's economy, you're seeing lots of mergers and acquisitions. So we now might be assessing new regional offices or new companies we've acquired that are now presenting a higher risk. So the most important thing is now you can be able to start communicating month after month. You can also do it week after week, or even whatever periodic schedule you would like. So very powerful storyboard that we have not seen any other competitor, any other service provider being able to tell a cyber financial risk and monetary value on a periodic basis. So with the last report, we've literally got thousands of reports, but I'm going to highlight these top 4. This is going to be the last one I show today, and I'm going to pick something that resonates with all the audience. This seems to be very powerful. The default report simply is going to show you every host that you've discovered, and it's also going to tell you the volume of unprotected records. So when you see these numbers here, the way to interpret that is we have 1,243 American Express cards that have been identified on that individual computer. Now, if you take that 1,243, you'll also see that it aligns with what we call our pivot table down here. And the reason we include a pivot table is so you can sit around the table and tell storyboards like, you might want to say, show me all of the payment data as it relates to Linux-based systems. And you'll notice that, I've got 8 or 9 machines here, and that includes $7 million of risk on Linux, for an example. Alternatively, what you could do is, if you leverage the file path, you could say, what about a business question that says, how many of my employees are storing or receiving or submitting some type of payment data in Outlook? So we could put in things like OST or PST files, and that'll also update your records. So at the end of the day, and by the way, I do want to hit on cloud sharing. This seems to be very popular. How many of you would like to understand how many employees are storing payment data in Dropbox? So you could run that same query, click on here to get to the individual result, and it'll also show you the file path of exactly where these employees are storing and what file it is. So very powerful stuff. Scott, I'm going to turn this back over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Billy. That was a really thorough explanation of reports, and I think some of the most interesting ones to me, for sure. Now, Billy, you told me to remind you before we let you go to tell us about quick wins in customer environments.
What we've really done is we're empowering you to go out and acquire that data very quick and fast. So that's going to be the first step. You want to go out and start running these assessments so you now have risk intelligence on all of your customers. We think we've removed all of the technical barriers to make that a simple process. So now it's going to start getting into the business hands, and now that you have visualization, what do we do about this? So it's impossible to talk about all of the quick wins, but I want to highlight 2 or 3 that we see on every network. And if you think about a normal employee, we'll pick on customer service for an example. A customer dials in, they call, and they say, can I have a copy of my receipt, or can I have a copy of my records? Customer service accesses a web application of that given customer that perhaps might include social, driver's license, so on and so forth. And what happens is they generate a PDF, and maybe the default, it downloads it to the download directory. And then they perhaps might even email it to the customer. So there's now two instances because it's now sitting in an OST or PST file. It's also sitting in a download directory. Unfortunately, most employees don't empty those download directories, and we typically see data even older than 10 years old sitting in those file paths. And in many cases, you'll see it and find it in the local My Documents files. So at the end of the day, I guess what I'm trying to conclude to is, if you make it a good practice to empty the downloads directory, that would be a quick win. However, there's also that employees that might delete some of that stuff. But what we also find as a quick win is we see countless occasions where all of that sensitive data is sitting in the recycle bin. Now think about it. If you actually emptied your recycle bin and deleted all the data out of your downloads, that will begin to start reducing that financial impact. And those are just a couple of quick examples on how to reduce that financial liability that we spoke about. On the vulnerability side, we simply just need to be doing a better job of patching our systems, not once a year, not once a quarter, but we need to do that on a continuous basis, monthly at the very worst. And then when you have critical threats such as shell shock and heartbleed and those types of things, we need to have the capacity or capability to quickly go out and assess networks, bring back that data, and start rolling out what I call that fix, regardless if it's a patch or not. So those are a couple of wins that, thanks for reminding me on that, Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. All of those I think resonate with all the technicians on the line. We've seen that 1,000 times, but it's not always visible. It's very much below the water, and you don't notice it till it bites you. So, having a product like this, I think, is a really excellent way to find that stuff and really kind of bring that to the forefront for your customers who probably it's out of sight, out of mind for them until it's too late. So I think there's a lot of potential here. So, Billy, I want to really thank you today. You did a great job with kind of giving us that full overview of risk intelligence. I think you've built a beautiful product here. I think it's fantastic. I know I've already had a lot of comments from partners. They're very excited to get in there and try it. There is a free trial, absolutely. Go to enable.com/risk intelligence. I think everybody probably on the webinar today has already had an email about this, but absolutely copy down that link, enable.com/risk intelligence. Go in there, fire up a trial. It's 14 days. You'll be able to scan 5 devices as many times as you want. So try everything. Our sales engineers, of course, can help you through anything you might have questions on, and we'll start producing a few extra videos on, Billy, I think there's maybe a quick wins video we could probably get into, as well as maybe some walkthroughs of some of those more critical reports as far as having that conversation with customers. And we've got a bunch of other collateral for you as well. So absolutely, I encourage everyone to give it a try. It's super easy to get into and try. It'll be minutes before you have your first results, and ultimately it does deploy and run through N-central. So you can hook it all through your central system, and I think there's a huge benefit to that there as well. So again, Billy, thanks very much for your overview today. I've really appreciated it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, Billy, we're just going to stick around for a couple more minutes and answer a couple of quick questions. We have 5 minutes, so if you are good to go, we'll just see what questions we can get answered in those 5 minutes. A lot of people have asked if it's integrated within Central. I think we've hopefully covered that off for you guys. Can you use it without using N-central? Yes. Absolutely. It's a standalone cloud product, easy to log into, easy to maintain. You can deploy those binaries in any way you'd like. So absolutely, you can use it without an N-central product. However, integrated and those regular recurring scans, I think is ideally the way you'd want to go. People are asking about pricing details. Once you go through a trial, I'm sure you'll get an email from our sales team. Ask them any questions you like about licensing and pricing. It's very inexpensive. Absolutely talk to our sales associate. It is extremely inexpensive and very easy to get into. And again, you have that assessment package and that as a service package. All right, and someone was asking about the assessment license, 4 quarterly scans per customer, or is it just 4 scans total? No, the assessment license is per customer, so you're going to be able to scan that entire environment 4 times a year, each customer. Of course, that is getting you into your sort of your groove for quarterly business reviews, I think. Billy, there was a question about where's the reporting data stored, but I think you talked about how we redact all of the important information. Do you just want to comment to that one quickly?
Yeah, a common question is, most of the technicians on the phone are going to find the scanning simple. The requirement is, since the local processor is running that scan, what takes place is the redacted and raw results, or what we call the masked results, are then submitted over HTTPS, which is just normal web traffic. So that's outbound 443 back to our server farm. We do use Amazon that has several instances throughout the globe. And that, what happens is, when that raw data comes back, we've created all our applications that enable you to simply create all these colorful and beautiful reports, if you will.
Perfect. I see someone was asking about liability costs in other currencies. So tell us a little bit about localization.
Yeah, so that's a great question. This week we are releasing globalization outside of the US, Canada, Sweden, the UK, Australia. We've also put Belgium and Germany and France that are coming up shortly around the corner, South America countries as well. So we have a laundry list of that. However, the default calculation right now is based on US. The globalization I was referring to is discovering local content to that specific country. So Social Security in Canada, for an example, would be important to those Canadian customers.
Right. So, as you say, currently US, but by the end of the week, we've got several countries coming into that system and localized to their specific data. So, basically, by the end of the week, we are nicely globalized, I would say, in this product. So, yes, absolutely, this product will apply to you if you're, outside of the US. Does it scan PST files? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we decode lots of different file formats. OST and PST files are very popular on where we're finding sensitive data. We spent countless hours actually decoding the OST file format. In fact, many of you may or may not know, but Microsoft changed the format. I think it was back in the 2013 release. So we spent several months, writing code that empower you to decode those file formats to gain visibility. I didn't really demonstrate that today, but when you look at it, we're going to give you additional information. So you have the email header stamp, the time, the subject line, and the goal is so you can be able to visit with that specific employee to better educate them on not to be submitting or receiving types of email with sensitive content.
A couple of folks asked how long the trial was. It's going to be a 14-day trial with 5 devices with unlimited scans. So you're able to get as many scans as you want in there, try all the reports, try everything, and get a really good feel for how it works. Last question I will answer is there an on-premise solution for this? So no, it's completely 100% SaaS. It's cloud-based. You don't need any local hardware at all. The binaries basically deploy out to those systems. They're dormant until you activate them. They run their scan, and then they go back to dormancy. Is that correct, Billy?
That is correct. It is not a persistent agent, just an executable. It only does something when you want it to.
Perfect. All right. Well, Billy, I think we'll stop it there. We've had a really good session today. I am super excited about this product. I think everyone will be able to take this product and create a revenue stream with it without any problems at all. It's a really, I think, easy conversation to have with a customer, and I think all of those end user customers want this conversation, but just they don't understand necessarily the information that's being presented to them. This tool, I think, really allows you to have that conversation in terms that they're going to get right off the bat, and it just proves its value the second you start showing reports and talking about that dollar cost figure. So I'm super excited about it. I know many of my partners that I've talked to in the last couple of days are as well. So thanks very much for helping us walk through it today.
Thanks for having me. Look forward to the next time.
And we'll see you all again on our next webinar.